Good.
All right, so as a continuation of our speaker series that we've been having, tonight we have a very special guest. On behalf of board, I would like to introduce Vyasar Ganesan, who is a local Austinite and was on the Netflix show Indian Matchmaking. We're very excited to hear what you have to say, Vyasar. Take it away.
Hi, everyone. It's so very good to be with you all. Give me just a moment. I'm going to pull up my presentation that I will be doing. For those of you wondering if this is a hoax, it is not a hoax. It is actually me. For those of you who are calling your friends and taking screenshots, appreciate it. Thank you. It's always nice to be reminded that I'm not McConaughey, but to Indian people I am. It's pretty great. So I think everyone can see my screen, yeah? Awesome. So today we're going to be talking about Indian American mental health. This is a sort of cut down version of a presentation that I've given a few times before. The first time I gave it actually was at LASA. I know we might have a few kids in here who've heard of LASA. It's the Liberal Arts and Science Academy. It's a high school in Austin, Texas, and it's where I graduated from back in 2008. And it's also the high school that I currently work at as a college counselor. So I gave this, we do an event every year called Cultural Day. And I gave this presentation, I think about a year and a half now at that. And then I gave it recently, we did a virtual version. So I did it again for that one. So it's pretty good, it's pretty good. But if you guys have comments or questions or anything, feel free to leave them in the chat. There will be time at the end of my presentation for questions, obviously. But yeah, we'll go ahead and get into it. So first off, like, why are we even having a conversation about mental health? I feel like it's 2020, I don't really have to address that. But I will. The pandemic obviously has had a strain on a lot of people, right? That's the big one right out the gate. It's been a stressor in a lot of different ways. For those of us who love travel, we can't really travel. For those of us who love going to restaurants, can't really do that. For those of us who love anything that involves leaving your house, really can't really do much of that. So it's taken away, it's hard to get away from the sense of loss, this sense of communal loss especially. So it's become a lot more important there too. But even before the pandemic, it felt like the world was ending in a lot of ways. This has been a hard year emotionally, psychologically, whatever you want to call it. It's just been hard the last couple of years. I've seen mental health be a lot more impactful just within the community that I work in, within high school students. They are all looking out for each other in a more significant way because of the impact of school shootings has had on their lives. This is a generation that grew up with Sandy Hook, that this is a generation that grew up hearing about Columbine and experiencing, for some of them, versions of it in their own lives. And so now mental health in high school isn't just about making sure everyone's going to be okay and no one's got test anxiety. It's about survival. It's about checking on your friends to make sure that this doesn't happen again, because we're not seeing an intervention at the federal level, the state level, at the city level. So we've got to intervene in our own way. And just, it's always going to be a conversation. I think now we're seeing a point where we live in a time where it's more acceptable than ever to talk about mental health. And I do want to stress that this is going to be a safe space. I'm going to get vulnerable and real, and I encourage you guys that if you have something you want to share, to get vulnerable and real too. Again, challenge by choice, right? Open up if you feel comfortable doing so. But I want to make it clear that any question you ask me, whether it's about the show, whether it's my own personal life, whether it's about my family, I am not going to shrink away from answering it. Feel free to ask me any questions. By that same token, I would like to ask you guys a favor. If you hear something you don't like, if you hear an answer that you don't agree with, if you feel comfortable, let me know. Disagreeing with someone is one of the most important things that you can do. And if you disagree with me, I want to hear it. And I want to be able to engage in that conversation, because I don't think it's about starting a fight. It's about creating space for conversation. And conversation isn't bad just because we don't agree. And I want to make that clear as we go forward. All right, so let's break it down a little bit. I'm going to use the terms Indian American, Asian American a little interchangeably, because I know we've got people who identify in different ways with that term, especially because sometimes it's harder to feel Indian than it is to feel Asian in general, and vice versa. But just as a term, right, it covers a pretty far range of ethnicities, countries, religions, identifiers, right? It's a pretty broad term. So when we use Indian American too, I think it's also important to acknowledge that we are talking about the Indian subcontinent, but it's also important to acknowledge that the term Indian is only really existing outside of India. Inside India, none of us call ourselves Indian, right? We'd be Bengali, Tamil, Telugu, Punjabi, Bengali, right? The term Indian itself comes outside of that. I know some of you are probably shaking your head like, this is like some high thoughts nonsense. This is the stuff that you think about when you're too drunk or too high. But it's important to think about in this context that like, that's part of this puzzle of mental health, is figuring out the way that label is used and how we compare ourselves, especially to other Indians, which we'll get into in a minute. So right, we all come from different places, but many of us experience similar things. Immigrant narratives, right off the top, right? That story of the struggle, that story of the hustle, that story of our generation being the first generation to be raised here, or our grandparents' generation coming and striking a name for themselves and building that intergenerational community. Family trauma is a big one. Imposter syndrome, we're going to spend some time talking about that. It's important to recognize that none of these are exclusive to one people or one group, that they're all part of our shared experience in a lot of ways, just by part and parcel with the term. So taking a step even further back, like, I think a lot of us want to be able to have this conversation, but many of us aren't ready to have it, and that's okay. The main thing that you have to remember is that mental health is a thing. It is a real thing that exists in the world. Right at the top, it says, even if your parents don't think so. It's no secret that many of us live and die by what our parents think and tell us. I still do. I only garden what my mother tells me to garden at this point. I'm so terrified of killing anything that I'm not willing to take a risk in that direction. And so, and for the longest time, I didn't go to therapy because my mom didn't think it was a good idea. But when I started going, and I was so terrified that she would disapprove, what ended up happening is said, look, I don't understand why you need to do this, but that's not why you should do it. You do it because it's important to you. And that was a really powerful thing and a great space to be in. And I recognize that not everyone's parents are going to be like that, and some of your parents are going to have that patent disbelief. But we're going to spend time talking about that too in a little bit. Even if you have good grades, this is a really, really common stereotype that, oh, this person must not be depressed or have anxiety or struggle with this eating disorder. Their grades are great, right? We have this image of our academic self and our emotional self being completely linked to the point where they overlap each other 100%. That academic success relates to emotional success, and that if you get an A, you are happy. I think they do affect each other, right? I think getting that A certainly makes you happy, but it doesn't keep you happy. And I think there's a difference there, right? The pint of Ben and Jerry's is going to make you happy, but how long is it going to keep you happy for? And what kind of happiness is it going to bring? And is that happiness that is a part of self-care or self-gluttony? Now, not knocking self-gluttony, longtime fat kid here, and proud of it. But it's important to recognize that you can be a straight A student and still be sad, and you can be a straight B student and still be sad, and still struggle with mental health. That the two do not necessarily create each other or cause each other or interact in that way. They're separate, but they do affect each other. That's the simplest way of saying it. Even if you feel fine most days, this is the big one, right? It's very easy to get frustrated when you feel like you're struggling. It's very, very easy to feel upset and sort of frustrated about these things that feel small, that feel inconsequential. Because for a lot of us, mental health really does feel that way. It really does feel small and inconsequential on a day-to-day basis, because like, I got bigger fish to fry. I'm running an organization that is literally putting food in the hands of people. I am running this lab that if things go wrong, the results could be catastrophic, but if things go right, I could get a guaranteed grad school admission anywhere I want. Like, that feels more important to me. And you know what? That's fair. That's completely reasonable. But you have to at least understand that everybody needs something, right? Whether you think that you have mental health issues or not, whether you think that you need counseling or therapy or not, or whether you think that, mental health even exists as a term, you have to at least acknowledge that we all need encouragement. We all need words of affirmation, positive relationships, friendship, good vibes, whatever you want to call it. We need a little something intangible that makes you feel good. That's worth pointing out, and it's worth thinking about, for sure. So one thing I do want to spend time on is confidentiality. That above everything else, confidentiality is one of the key pieces of mental health. This, of course, matters a lot more with high school students, right? Because it feels like, when you're a minor, your parents rule your world. And when you're a college student, your parents still rule your world in different ways. But the most important thing to remember is that there's a bunch of privacy laws out there that ensure your right to confidentiality. That therapy is really between you and your therapist. If you're in group therapy, again, there's like a compact agreement that everyone kind of makes. This is really just for us, not for anyone else. One of the most common myths I remember hearing when I was in college is going to therapy will get you kicked out of college. That if you are struggling with mental health and you go see a counselor, one of the first things that's going to happen is you're going to be asked to take a leave of absence, or you're going to leave college, you're going to leave campus, and you're going to be seen as a failure. And that's just not true. That's just not true at all. The role of a therapist is not to call up the dean and say, oh yeah, this kid has problems. That's not what they're there for. They're there to help you, to talk to you, to listen to you. So it's important to remember that it's not going to get you kicked out. It's just between you and the therapist. Another one is that, oh, if you go to therapy, it goes on your record, and that's going to affect your chances of getting into a good school later on. Again, comes up a lot more when we talk about high school students getting into college, but I still think the myth exists for some college students that what happens about grad school. If I'm thinking about grad school in my future, is this going to stop me? And again, it is not going to do that. That's not part of what you send to grad school admissions. It's not part of your GRE or your MCAT or your LSAT, right? It doesn't show up in that way. It doesn't show up at all, really. The only issues that are going to get reported when you go to therapy are issues related to self-harm, threats to others, or abuse, right? Issues that we think we can all agree should be reported, that this is how you get the help that you need, more than just your hour therapy appointment once a week or once every other week. And the last point here is the most important one. If you need help, you have the right to seek it out. No one needs to know unless you tell them. I think we live in an age where oversharing is normal. We live in an age now where telling everyone everything is kind of expected of you. And if you don't tell them everything, what's wrong with you? Why did you feel like you couldn't share that with me? Does that say something weird about our friendship? Are we really not as close as we thought we were? I know I'm ranting here, but you guys get the message that I'm saying, right? You don't have to talk to people about this. This is not a team sport. This is something that you do on your own. No one needs to know unless you tell them, unless you want to tell them, unless you choose to do that. All right, this is your journey, this is your path, whatever you want to call it. It's just you. Your confidentiality matters most, because if you have to be able to create the space and the conditions in which you can feel vulnerable, and confidentiality is key to that. It really is. So let's go back to this term American Indian. So when we're talking about the term American, I think it's obvious, right? We're talking about the wider world of the United States, the culture of Texas, the environment at school, right? The ways in which we feel American, the ways in which we embrace our American culture in different ways. Could be hot dogs, could be, you know, July 4th celebrations and fireworks. It could be growing ridiculous mustaches, whatever the case may be. Not looking at you, part. Sorry, I'm just kidding. It's not ridiculous, it's nice. Then we have Indian, right? The life at home, the culture of our family, and of course, most importantly, our relationships with other Indians. Sorry, I forgot the S on that one. This is important to understand because the two overlap, right, as we see in our lovely Venn diagram here, but they are also bubbles in this way. Many of us, I think, are familiar with the term code switching, right? The mask that we wear that is American versus the mask that we wear that is Indian. The language that we speak at home versus the language that we speak in the outside world. And it actually took me a long time to realize that that language has very little to do with English and Hindi. That has more to do with diction and word choice, because you can speak Hindi with your friends and you can speak Hindi with your family, but it's a very different kind of Hindi that you're speaking between the two in a lot of ways. And even just code switching is more than language, it's also body language, right? The way that you hold yourself at home, the way that you present yourself, your comfort level and your fidgeting level could be very, very different than the way you are outside of the home. And we feel comfortable in different ways, in different circles in these environments. I don't want to take up too much time. I know our hosts have other stuff planned, and I want to respect their time, but I just want to tell a quick story. When I was in college, it was my first time being in an environment where there weren't a lot of Indian people around. I grew up, you know, with a pretty big family nearby. There were plenty of Indians at my school. I went to temple every Sunday, and we had a massive Indian gang there. I was running a family camp every year that had more than 80 Indian kids there. So I had a very well-connected Indian network. And when I got to college, you know, I went to a small liberal arts college in the middle of Northwest Pennsylvania. There were 5 other Indian people at the school, and none of them wanted to be my friend. They were all more comfortable being the only Indian person in the room. It was my first time meeting people like that. And I don't blame them. I didn't then and I don't now, because that's a survival method for a lot of people. And that's frankly, the unpacking of Indian American identity, which I have a whole other presentation on, is a lot of work. And for a lot of people, for sometimes it is more comfortable to say, my name isn't Anuj, it's AJ. And dye their hair blonde and adopt accents that are unfamiliar to them, or try to downplay the fact that they're Indian as much as they can for whatever reason they can. But it was still a shock to me, and it was still the first time I had to experience that moment and try to navigate my own way through it as well. Okay, and of course this segues nicely into imposter syndrome. And again, like as we come up with questions and as we like create space for discussion towards the end of this, keep thinking about all these things too. This is one of the biggest things that we're seeing in 2020 as it relates to mental health, especially in people of my generation, millennials, and in your generation as well. That we're beginning to feel like we don't belong, and we're beginning to recognize these feelings of not belonging. So for some of us may not be familiar with the term, so I'll unpack it a little bit. Imposter syndrome is really just entering an environment where you feel like you got in by mistake. Again, I'll give you guys an example. 2015, I had my very first job interview for my very first full-time job. I was a year out of grad school. I was applying for an admissions counseling position at Texas State down in San Marcos. At the time, I did not own a suit. I was living that starving artist lifestyle. So I owned one blue button down, one blue pants, one pair of blue pants, a brown belt, blue shoes, and blue socks with sharks on them. And that is what I wore to this job interview. I did not have a PowerPoint presentation prepared. I did not know anything about Texas State when I showed up, and I got the job. And to this day, I do not understand why I got this job. To this day, I remember walking around that office every single day, looking at everyone who was vastly more professional than me, and thinking, why the hell am I here? I have an MFA in creative writing, for God's sake. I am the most useless person in this office. And for years, I went that way. And I would go and talk to my boss at every opportunity and say, can you just tell me why you gave me this job? And she wouldn't. She refused to do it because she thought she was having fun with me. But for me, it was driving me crazy. I just need one answer. I need one word that tells me why you gave me this job. And I could not figure it out for the life of me. I really couldn't. And it drove me nuts because it made me feel like I don't belong here. I got in by a fluke, and someone's going to figure it out and realize, kicked his ass to the curb. What the hell is he doing here? Why in a million years would we hire him to be the face of Texas State University? And so that's sort of what it was like for me. I'm describing sort of the experience of what it was like. And we all feel it in different ways, for sure. It can happen in classes sometimes when you feel like you're the only person who doesn't understand what the teacher is talking about. It can happen when you go out, and there's that weird moment where everyone is like having a good time and all of a sudden you don't have a good time, and then you feel like, oh, well, I'm shitty because I'm not having a good time. Sorry, my mom's calling me. So, there's all kinds of circumstances in which it can come up. And it relates to us in a lot of different ways. So it's always important to think about it there too. This is, of course, a good tie into our model minority stereotype triangle. I made this for a presentation on Asian American identity and its history in the United States, but I just loved it so much that I decided to use it here. And of course, we're familiar with the trifecta of doctor, lawyer, engineer, but I think some of us have also seen that lawyer is kind of on the out, that people are starting to say, oh, you're going to be a lawyer? Is everything okay? Is something wrong at home? Is what's going on? Now it's like business and finance are starting to take the place of a lawyer, economics especially. But I sort of have these other words sort of bubbled around it to indicate that, like, when people talk about, oh, engineering is so flexible, you can do so much with it, they really are talking about different trees. Or being a doctor, you can go into research, you can do biomedical stuff. Like, there's different, they're all separate, but they're all connected too. I think it's important to talk about this and unpack it. I wish we had more time for me to really go in depth about it, but we'll make time during question and answers for sure and to talk about it too. The main thing to recognize is that this is a useful thing and a not useful thing. And I don't want to disparage anyone who really wants to do these things. If you feel that this is your calling to be a lawyer, a doctor, or an engineer, I want you to chase that. I want you to feel happy, and I want you to know that I support you in that. Really, 100%. But I think you also have to recognize that this is also part of what we tell young Indian people that are the only options for them. In a world where Priyanka Chopra can be on Quantico, in a world where Abhi the Nomad can be like an amazing rapper, we have to start acknowledging that Indian Americans can be more than this. We have to start acknowledging that there is a world outside of this and make it a real thing for people. Because I think what's starting to happen is that everyone's like, oh, you can be a doctor and an artist. Oh, you can do this and this. We're starting to recognize that, oh, well, everyone's got a side hustle. Let your creative side be your side hustle, your gig. Because people know what the gig economy is and they're comfortable with that. Like, I'd rather see you paint and sell your paintings than be an Uber driver, But I think we have to start getting to a point where or is also good, where you can be a doctor or an artist, where you can be an engineer or a dancer, because those are real things. Those are real jobs. Those are real roles that society has for our people. 10 years ago, if you had told me that we would live in a world where Indian circuses were traveling the United States, where performing arts venues that were catering exclusively to Indian Americans, I'd have told you you were crazy, but that's the world we live in now. You'll see billboards with Indian Americans on them. You'll see us as news anchors, as meteorologists, as dancers, as folk artists. Like, we deserve to have a piece of the bigger world. That's all you have to understand when you look at this. It doesn't just have to be these three things. There are a lot of other issues with mental health. So I kind of came up with a list to just help you guys brainstorm other directions that it can come up in. I won't spend time going through all of them. I just want to point out a few things. Language is a key thing. I imagine many of us here speak a language other than English, but some of us probably don't. Some of us don't know anything other than English. And that's not a guilt trip thing. That's just a fact that there is a huge segment of the Indian American population that only speaks English. And there's a lot of guilt and mental anguish tied up in that, because there is constant grief and shame in the home about that. There is constantly someone you're related to, someone you know, in a position of authority over you who says, man, I really wish you knew how to speak this language in some way or form. And it comes up in these weird, especially for people who describe them, who would like to think of themselves as intelligent or gifted or talented people in that way, right? I'm so smart at this thing. Why can't I be smart at this thing too? Why was I never able to pick this up? Why didn't I never do this? And it becomes a lot of self-defeating talk, and it becomes a lot of negative self-imagery in a lot of ways. That segues nicely actually into intelligence. This is another big one, that Indian Americans are supposed to be smart, that we're supposed to be always successful, always intelligent, always make right choices. We deserve the right to act like shitheads too. We deserve the right to sometimes, not make the right choice. Like, I want you all to make good choices. The educator in me is desperately screaming, make good choices, but I also have to recognize that it's okay to mess up. It's okay to make mistakes, and it's okay to not be the smartest person in the room. Simpular, I think is his name. I can never remember his name. Simpular was an Indian American NFL player, and his whole notion was that he wants to show people that we're not just all, skinny-necked doctors and bespectacled scientists, that we've got some big guys too. As a 6'8", 280-pound brown man, I respect that. But, and I'm not discounting the skinny, the doctors and the bottleneck people. I want to make it clear that, like, it's not tied up in your identity. It shouldn't be. Just because you're Indian doesn't mean that you should have to be smart, is really what I'm saying. The last thing I want to talk about too is appearance. This is a big one. Again, to share a personal story here. I'm half South Indian. My dad is from South India, and my mother's family is primarily North Indian. And so the rest of my family, my cousins, their parents are almost always North Indian. And, they were mostly, married to people from Bombay or from Lucknow or other parts around Delhi. And so they mostly have fairer skin or wheatish complexion, as we like to say. They kind of all look very similar, except for me. I stand out like a big 6'8" sore thumb. And it's been a source of grief for me in a lot of ways, because I can very easily tell, I am not like these people. I get along with them all. I have great times with them. Family reunions are my highlights of my years, but I don't look like everybody else. And it comes up in friend groups too. Like, I'll be hanging out with other Indian people, and it's very clear, I don't look like them. I don't feel like them. I don't belong. And it comes up in all kinds of circumstances. For a lot of us who hang out sometimes in groups that are entirely made up of white people, it becomes very clear, how our hair looks, how our skin looks, how our, appearance is portrayed. And appearance, of course, comes in a lot of different ways too. It's also, when everybody's bringing PB&J to lunch, we're bringing dal chawal, right? When everyone is getting to celebrate Christmas or Thanksgiving, we're celebrating Diwali and Holi. Indian New Year comes right in the middle of the year. It's very, right, it's like there are tricky things that come around appearance, that's also cultural appearance and identity appearance that can become mental health points as well. The last slide I want to share before we open up for questions and comments is just a list of resources. If you are struggling with this, you don't have to feel like Vyasar is the only one you can talk to. Although I will give out my email if people want to chat with me, that's fine. I just want to make clear that I'm not a therapist. College counselor is very different than mental health counselor. I can help you with grad school stuff, maybe. But there's a lot of resources out there. Just in Austin, you've got the Capital Area Mental Health Center. The Asian American Resource Center actually does some great Asian American mental health resources as well. If you're curious to learn more about Asian American history, specifically, the history of Indians immigrating to America, Bengali Harlem by Vivek Bald is a really, really great book. The Asian American Literary Review is one of my favorite resources out there. They do a lot of really cool projects. I encourage you to look into something called Open an Emergency. It's sort of like a mental health first aid kit is what they call it. If you're ever having a crisis, you literally can open up this box that they created and pull out random things to help you sort of self-counsel, essentially. But yeah, that's mostly what I just wanted to give a quick spiel and intro on. But I'm happy to take questions if you want to unmute and ask them, or if you want to just drop them in the chat. Either way is good for me. If you have comments or something you want to share, if there's another slide you want me to go back to, whatever.
Oh, we can open up to questions then, right? Oh,
yeah, let's do it.
There's some in the chat.
I'm going to stop sharing just for a sec. Here we go. Himali asked, what are some ways to open up the mental health discussion with our families? That's a great question. The first thing I want to say is actually don't feel like you have to. Don't feel like this is something you need to do. I think figuring it out, there's the old adage, right? You have to figure out how to make yourself happy before you can make anyone else happy. I think that's still true when it comes to mental health. You got to figure out how to be able to talk to yourself about mental health before you can have a conversation with your family about mental health. Because it also comes back to challenge by choice, right? It's really difficult to have a conversation like this with someone when they're not ready to have that conversation with you. I think that has to be the first point. If you are going to bring it up with your family, you have to say, this is something I want to be able to talk about. What are the things that we need to be able to do to create that space? Maybe that's making a roadmap of what an honest and open conversation looks like, where you can create a space where people can be as honest as they feel, where no discussion is taboo. Like maybe just creating the space for honest and open conversation and communication. Maybe that's the first step. Another way to look at it too is start small. Don't feel like you have to start with your grandmother or the most respected, most important person of your family. Start with people that you feel like you can relate to on a more personal. If you have cousins that are close to your own age, for example, great place to start. If you have even younger relatives, right? Kids who are like very, very young. Mental health is a very easy thing to talk to about with kids because it comes up in schools now and it comes up in a lot of their daily discussions. And it's not something your parents will necessarily pay attention to when you're talking to them about it as well. Just baby steps. Don't feel like it has to go whole ham. Find small ways to do it. And maybe it's not an unstructured conversation. Maybe you find a way to make it a structured thing. Like there's that book, 100 Questions You Want to Ask Your Parents Before they die, right? That's a great place to start, is finding like questions like that, finding places where you can include structure. For those of you who like dice games, right? Maybe make like a chart of questions on a board and roll dice. That provides even the smallest amount of structure. Because sometimes families are comfortable operating within that boundary. I can say for my family, what's worked with me, Mom has started doing her own version of therapy. She sees a Reiki healer because, we're crunchy granola Austin hippie people. And she understands, like for her, that's her therapy. Like she feels really like her therapy is body therapy and body healing. And it's been difficult because like for me, like going to therapy has been a great place to just have open, honest conversation. And I want to be able to have open and honest conversation with my mother. But I can't. There are just things that I'm not going to be able to be honest with her about. There are things that I can't really tell her. And that's really only hit me this year. And that's really only hit me in a way that's made me process it this year. And I'm not happy about it. And there are ways I'm trying to solve it. And there are ways that I'm trying to reconcile it. But I just acknowledge too that that's partially what having healthy boundaries means. That you don't share everything. You share what you're comfortable with, and you have to try to find a way to live like that. I hope that answered your question, Himali. If other people want to hear me rant, feel free to drop more questions in the chat or unmute and ask them. Okay, Rishabh has a question. What are some Indian American, Asian American resources, books, podcasts, blogs, etc. have you found helpful to see how other Indian Asian Americans experience life? This is a great question. We live in the golden age of Asian American media, my children. Truly, never before have we seen this much Asian American media out there. Right off the bat, the Juggernaut, great place to turn to. Really, truly wonderful place to look. They have got great links and resources to a lot of places and a lot of things to look at. not just news, but also mental health resources, reviews, book reviews, things like that. Other places I would look, there's They See American Life, which is a podcast I really like. I was actually a contributor on that one. That was a really fun one. If you just want a good time, if you just want to like hear people rant about Indian movies and Bollywood movies, the Bad in Bollywood podcast is really good. That one, the guys who run it are actually, I'm actually laughing talking about them because they really are just funny dudes. They're just very comical, wonderful people. Those are a couple of places that I would say to turn. I wish I had more resources off the top of my head that I could name. I'm sure as soon as this meeting ends, I'm going to remember more. But feel free to dig around on Google. Seriously, like you'll find a lot of really, really great stuff in Google, and you guys are savvy. You will be able to tell very quickly, oh, this is helpful, and oh, this is not helpful. That's the main thing too. Like if you type in Indian American mental health now onto Google, you'll find a lot more than you'd expect. All right, we're seeing some more questions pop in. That's good. Let me scroll. Here we go. Wait, there we go. Shobi, Gurleen, and Simone asked, what was the biggest takeaway from being on Indian matchmaking? This is a great question. I think the biggest takeaway, I'm gonna give two things because that's what my brain is working on now. The first thing is just like, I really felt more connected to the Indian American community than I ever felt before. That I have a lot of Indian friends, but this really made it feel like, oh, I feel like I'm part of the Indian American experience now. That's really cool and special and important to me because this is my life and I want to claim ownership of that. The other biggest thing that I sort of took away from it was sort of recognizing how special and unique this opportunity was. Not just working with Seema and Dee, although that was its own special and unique experience too, but also getting to work with the Netflix crew, getting to work with a production team that was fairly diverse, where we had women camera operators, when we had black sound guys, where we had people of color across the entire spectrum at all levels, whether they were production assistants, whether they were the executive producers, whether they were people. I got to meet the Netflix's director of documentary productions came to my house. He's this wonderful gay Chinese man, and he was just sitting in my living room, and we were talking about gay culture in Austin. It was great. We had a lot of fun. But yeah, just getting to connect and do that was a really special experience that I'm eternally thankful for. All right. Moving right down the list with a question from Ria. Has COVID changed the way you give advice about major and career choices? Yes and no. Again, very good question. One of the most important things about our school is that we have a very college-going culture. That 99% of our students, it feels like, are applying to four-year colleges and going to four-year colleges. But we always have kids who need to take a little extra time. And what I've always told students is that whatever taking extra time means to you, whether that's going to community college, whether it's taking a gap year, whether that's traveling, whether that's working on that great American novel, there's nothing wrong with taking more time to figure out what you want to do. And I try to tell them, let that sink in. Let that really, really sink in. Because when you are 17, you are told you have a year to figure out your major. You have 3 months to write this college application, write these essays. Go, 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 go. And what I've always told them is that I think that is criminal, and I think that that needs to change. And you taking these gap years, you giving yourself more time is how we make that change. So if you're not ready for it, that's okay. College will still be there. It's not going anywhere. And you know what? Employers, jobs, whatever, no one cares really where you started. What matters is where you finish. Whether that means you transfer from ACC to UT, whether that means you go to another college and then transfer to another college and then transfer to 6 more colleges after that before you really figure out where you want to go, whether that means you change your major 1,000,000 times, where you started does not matter. Where you end up, that's what matters. So that hasn't really changed with COVID. With COVID, the biggest changes that we've seen are with testing, just because test optional has become, the lay of the land. I know a lot of us are thinking, man, I wish it was test optional when I was applying. And that's fair, because let's be real, for years, the SAT and the ACT have not been measures of academic ability. They've been measures of test-taking ability. In layman's terms, they're just the measure of how good you can take a test, which is a ridiculous thing to ask because it's ridiculous. And College Board is the devil, but we can get into that later. But the main thing I always try to tell students is make the choice that you want to make, not the choice that external factors are influencing. You know, again, it's not a team sport. It's your life that we're talking about here. You got to have agency. You got to own it. All right. Maybe that has a long question, but I'm going to read the whole thing because I like the way it starts. My parents absolutely believe that therapy is good for me, but can't seem to wrap their minds around the fact that it's good even if you don't have quote unquote issues. They think that once a person has largely healed from past trauma, the job of therapy is done. How do you suggest trying to have a conversation about this? That is an excellent question. A lot of people in my family feel the same way. What I try to tell people honestly is the best time I have in therapy is when I feel like I'm having a great day, when I feel like I'm having a great month, when I feel like nothing is wrong. Because what therapy shows me in those moments is not that you were wrong, something is wrong. It just makes the space for reflection a positive, warm environment. It makes me more communicative. It makes me more willing to grapple with them because I feel like I have the energy to do it. I feel like, yeah, let's get into this. This is something that came up before. I am here and I'm ready to get up and into it. Whereas when things are going wrong, all I want to talk about is things that are going wrong. I'm like, no, we can't talk about, my daddy issues. We got to talk about this girl that I'm seeing who doesn't like Star Wars. That's immediately more pressing to me. So I would try to bring it up in that way, that there's a lot of there's a lot that positive energy brings to the table in these circumstances because it lets you dive deeper and it lets you create things that you wouldn't otherwise be able to create. And a lot of people feel like, well, isn't that a mood killer? Aren't you just like destroying your good vibes when you do that? And sometimes that does happen. I'm not going to lie and say that like you still feel as positive after therapy sometimes. But in general, no. In general, I think it just like it gives you an hour to just be present and vulnerable. And giving yourself an hour to be present and vulnerable is never a bad thing. I could say more, but I know there's more questions and I want to try to be fair. Okay, Sahil Barak asks, what are some starting points / tips to start building good mental health habits or a good mental health routine? Man, I actually need to think more about this. I don't feel like I always have the good mental health routine. Half of my dinner tonight was that pint of Ben & Jerry's. Although to be fair, didn't have the whole pint, just the top. Probably one of the most important things, food is always a big thing with me. Again, not just because I'm a lifelong fat kid, but because I wrote 147 master's thesis on the history of Indian food in America. Probably the most important thing that you can do for yourself is try to give yourself a healthier diet. And healthy means different things to different people. I'm not asking for you to make salad all the time. I personally get disgusted by salad. But try to do things for yourself that you know are good for you. And I think that can be extended beyond food to really what self-care is, because I think self-care, my generation has interpreted self-care as Facebook scrolling, as, watching YouTube videos or falling down a Wikipedia hole. Whereas really what self-care is sometimes is getting work done, because God damn it, it feels really good to watch your inbox go from 100 unread emails to 0 unread emails, Sometimes getting work done is a form of self-care. Sometimes exercise is a form of good self-care. Sometimes cleaning your house is a good form of self-care. Getting things done feels good a lot of the time. A good starting place for a good mental health routine is being willing to just give yourself a moment to be present every time. And that looks different in different ways. Again, I'll give you an example. Sometimes when I hear a song on the radio, it makes me want to cry. And normally what I do is I change the channel, or I call my mom, not to cry, but just to talk. Or I call somebody else just to talk. But what I've started doing is that if I feel like I need to cry, I start crying. I try to start crying at least. And if I feel like it's overwhelming, I literally pull over to the side of the road, turn my hazards on, crank up the volume, and cry in my car. Sometimes that means I'm late getting home. Sometimes that means I'm late for an event. But what it really means is I get to be present. I get to fully embrace and explore that emotion. And I grant you, not everybody's going to be able to do that. You can't, in the middle of your jog, hear that sad song come on, and then stop in the middle of the UT Quad and start crying. People will think you're crazy. But find places that you can do that. Find places where you can just be present and open, because that's how you open the door to being vulnerable. Where I am now is not something that's come out of the blue or come out of since the Netflix show. Where I am now is something that I've been trying to work on for years and years and years. I still don't fully understand what the word vulnerable means, but it doesn't stop me from trying, and it doesn't stop me from working on it. And I think ultimately that's where you have to start. Vivi asks, as a minority, did you feel like there was ever a barrier that you had to cross to be able to reach your students? Yes and no. This is a very good question, because Lhasa is a very, very diverse place, especially with Asian Americans. I think solidly 18% of our school is just South Asian, is just Indian or Pakistani or Iranian. So there's a lot we have in common across the brown diaspora just off of that. Furthermore, I graduated from the same high school, so I know which classes are hard. I know that OChem sucks. Let's get real. OChem is always terrible until you get to PChem. PChem is the devil. So I kind of understand where they're coming from in different ways. There are still barriers that I definitely have to cross. I don't have TikTok. I don't have Instagram. I'm still scared of it. But I understand that there are parts of that that define their daily experience in a lot of ways. Honestly, the biggest barriers I have are dealing with my wealthy white students. I'll give you an example. I was flying recently, and I ran into, it was a flight from Chicago back to Austin, and I ran into one of the families that I work with, and I recognized, and it was a family coming back from a lacrosse tournament. The kid had just celebrated a big win. He had couches coming up to him and slapping on the back and saying he did such a great job. And we're running in the airport, and we're boarding the plane together, and they're sitting down in first class, and the dad looks up at me and says, please don't judge us. Please don't judge us for sitting in first class. He's just got this pleading, desperate look in his eye that his wealth is embarrassing. That, to me, a man working in public education, his ability to buy first class tickets for his family is embarrassing. And it was kind of a shocker to me because we've been having such a great conversation up to that point. Wealth wasn't something that came up. You know, I didn't bring up, like, no one was bringing up the fact that lacrosse was invented by Native Americans and that it's now played primarily by preppy white kids, right? No one was bringing up anything like that. We were just celebrating the fact that his son had done such a great job and that MIT coaches were looking at him and that was such a big fucking deal. But it made this weird moment come up. And I realized, like, oh, this is a very different experience they have. Like, I'm moving to the back of the plane. They are not. And so sometimes there are barriers that come up like that. I'll give another example too. There, literally, it was actually, this is my first day on the job. I had a meeting with a parent and a student who are both Indian American. This is my first counselor meeting. They sit down, and before the kid can say anything about where he wants to go to college or what he wants to study, the dad says, I really want him to become a mechanical engineer. It's an honorable profession. You know, I don't want him to end up like something useless, like an English major. And I paused, and I turned and looked, because behind me were my degrees on the wall. Allegheny College, Bachelor's of Arts in English, and then Columbia University, MFA in Creative Writing. I just turned and looked at them, and I turned and looked back, and I said, you know, I'm an English major. And immediately, both kid and dad, jaws drop, tears streaming, apologies, like, oh my God, I'm so sorry, I didn't know. How could we have known? We're so sorry. I'm like, first of all, you could have known. It's on the wall, like directly behind you. Second of all, I'm not mad at you. I'm not upset, or nor do I feel insulted. Let's use this as an opportunity to actually talk about what you mean when you say useless. Let's use this as an opportunity to talk about what's going to make your son happy. And I think for the rest of the semester, the kid was still really upset and nervous every time he came and talked to me. But we actually were able to use this as an opportunity to sort of cross that bridge and come to an understanding of what we really mean when we're thinking about degrees and what's useless and not, and what we really think about when we think about student happiness as well. All right, Jenica asked, you mentioned you have a creative writing MFA. Have you written anything, or do you have plans to write anything about the Indian American experience or in general? That's a good question. I've published, if you go to my website, shameless plug, vyasarwrites.com, you'll find a lot of my writings sort of scattered around the internet, and I have written a lot about the Indian American experience. I've had a lot of it published in a few other places. I will reveal that I am working on several projects. I have been working on several projects for a long time, so really not that big of a revelation. But I am working on one that I'm really excited about that I think has a lot of potential, that is about the Indian American experience. I actually did just get a poem published in a really unlikely place. There's this restaurant in the East Village in New York City called Smack, or Samac, like s'mores, you know, there's Samac, like mac and cheese. This is a restaurant entirely devoted to mac and cheese. They serve a million different kinds of it. And one thing they started doing when the pandemic hit was including a little short story or poem with every delivery they gave that went out. And they were trying to do it to support artists in this time, and they would give them $100 cash and a $100 gift card to the restaurant. So back in June, I sent a few poems and stories to them, and I just got a response about 3 weeks ago from the owner saying that they're going to publish my poem, and it's going to start going out. I think last week it started going out. So I think for the rest of November, if you order mac and cheese from the East Village restaurant Smack, you will get your order plus my poem, which is pretty sweet. It's my first publication of 2020, which feels really nice. But I am working on some stuff. I think right now I'm working on, so I've got my 147-page master's thesis about Indian food in America, which is really just an excuse for me to go and eat at restaurants and talk to chefs, which I like doing, so it's nice, and researching food history. Pro tip, if you ever want to get a free meal, or want to butter up a chef, tell them you're a food writer. It's great. Which is better. It's better than saying you're food blogger or foodie or Instagram personality who takes pictures of their food. But also, like, just every once in a while, research food. Like, just the history of the word curry is worth digging into, right? Or just like let your head wrap around the fact that India did not have the tomato or the peanut or the jalapeno until the Portuguese invaded. That they brought that with all of them. And there are some of us who are literally like, I can't imagine Indian food without the tomato. I cannot imagine Indian food without certain varieties of chili or the potato, right? Like, there are just parts of Indian food that don't exist without that. So, you know, that's a really rich place of the Indian American experience that it's worth diving into. I will continue to take more questions if you want to unmute or ask more. Medha, I'm sorry I wasn't your counselor in high school. My counselor in high school was pretty shitty. His name was Dr. Qualls. He's dead. I don't have a problem naming him. He worked for the district for over 40 years and was literally just cashing a paycheck when I came to meet with him. He didn't meet with me until after I got admitted to college. And when I came into his office, he was angry. He told me, well, you've already been accepted. What the hell are you doing here? He's like, well, we had a meeting. You asked to meet with me. He's like, well, look, it's April. You know where you're going. Get the hell out of here. Right then, that's when I knew this man is useless. So, yeah, right there with you. Oh, Rishabh wants top 3 fave places in Austin. All right, I'll give you 2 lists. Places to be and places to eat. 3 places to be. The river, right? Just getting out on the Colorado River is my favorite thing in the world. Getting on a canoe, $20 for an hour, or however much it is now. Just getting out there for an hour and being there. Number 2 is laser tag. I know it's a lot of people have mixed feelings about laser tag. I fucking love it. It is 3 stories of fun. It's unlike any other laser tag experience you've ever had in your life. If you have never been to laser tag, you owe yourself a trip. It's wonderful. Pizza's not that bad. And let's see, other favorite place to be. This is really sappy, but I love the Capitol. I really love the Capitol. Not because I'm interested in Texas politics, although I am, but just because it's nice to walk around. It's so beautiful there. It's just a really beautiful space and a really, just frankly, gorgeous building. Stay away from the squirrels, but, you know, aside from that, everything else is great. Places to eat. All right. First place is definitely going to be an Indian restaurant, because who are we kidding? Asiana down south off of William Cannon 35. When it opened, it got top 38 restaurants in Austin, and that is no mean feat for an Indian restaurant that has a buffet on Sundays. It is well deserved. It is one of the few places I have been to that does pan-Asian food really, really well. Or pan-Indian food, sorry. They can make tarka as well as they make dosa, you know? So they really, really do a good job of giving you the whole smorgasbord of the Indian experience. Bolton Creek Cafe is another standby. I'm a vegetarian. I've been a vegetarian since I was 16. Bolton Creek Cafe is the place that caters to me the best. I love it so, so much. I have a deep and long-standing affection for it. And then, bizarrely, I also really love cilantro. Something about those kimchi fries just hits a spot. You know, it really hits a very specific spot. Let's see. Deja asks, I thought it was really interesting how you talked about how in this culture there's an emphasis on sharing a lot and how sometimes that can be counterproductive. Well, I think it can. I think that sharing is good. Sharing is caring, right? As Barney told us. But sometimes you're not ready to share. Challenge by choice. I'll say it again. I'll say it 1,000 fucking times if I have to. We really have to be careful about how we share and who we share with and what we want and the circumstances in which we share. I may end up regretting the fact that this is being recorded right now. Some of you may turn what I'm saying into a GIF and put it on Twitter and ruin the rest of my fame, which I'm fine with, honestly. But I have to recognize that, like, I overshare all the time. That's part of what I interpret being vulnerable as. But I may be making a mistake in doing that. To me, right now, the bigger mistake feels like not being vulnerable, not being willing to take the hard questions to bat. But I don't want to say that that's my prescription for the human race. That everyone is different and everyone has to do this their own way. And for some of us, it's gonna take us longer to get to wherever we need to be, and that's okay. However long it takes. Again, what is more important is not where we start or how long it takes, it's that we get there. It's that we keep trying to get there. Ria asks, favorite thing to do / place to study on campus? Oh God, again, I'm a sucker for this kind of thing. Bowling, the bowling in the Union, I miss it. I really, really miss bowling in the student union. Gosh, especially wearing like fun multicolored things and watching the neon lights hit it. You can do some fun things with that. Okay, Sami wants to say, not a question, just wanted to thank you for sharing great personal stories and advice with us. Of course, my pleasure. Hemali, one last question. What is my biggest regret? This is a tough one. This honestly is. I've had a really interesting and bizarre life. I don't regret a lot of things. This isn't my biggest regret. This is just the one that comes to mind. I may come up with another one while I'm talking about it. We'll see. When I was in grad school, I started dating my roommate. Not a smart choice. Not a smart choice by any means. It ended up with a lot of heartbreak, a lot of pain, and just for the next year, a lot of misery, even after we ended things. Not because of who she was or who I was, just because you shouldn't date your roommate. You just shouldn't, right? You should be better than that and smarter than that. Make better choices, guys. Don't do that. Like if you feel like you want to date your roommate, move out and then start dating them. Just make better choices. I guess other regrets that I've had. I regret that Netflix chose not to show me hitting my head on an exit sign. There was a great moment where we were doing some filming of just some like filler footage, and they got me on a dolly moving backwards, and I'm not seeing what's coming behind me. And one of those exit signs at school is wham right in the back of the head. And it's great because they caught it in slow-mo too, so you really get to see the full range of facial expressions, like just like going all the way. Yeah. I don't know. I might come back to that one. Okay. If you have to give us one piece of advice, what would it be? I want to say make good choices, but I've already yelled that at you. Find the thing you love and do the hell out of it. I don't care how long it takes. I don't care where it takes you. I care that you find the thing that you love to do and beat the hell out of it. However you want to interpret that, whether that's your job, whether that's your hobby, whether that's something that you do as a side gig, or whether that's something you do when you wake up in the morning and do in the shower, whatever it is. If you can feel like it's something you get to do, if not every day, every other day even, just do it. Because life is too short to spend time doing things that you hate. Spend it doing things that you love.
All right. Yeah. Thank you so much, Vyasar, for coming through. Like, I think all of us had a great time. I was laughing the entire time. I learned a lot. And I think personally, I just got to connect with you on a lot of basis. Like, I'm also half Indian. My dad's South Indian. My mom's North Indian. My mom also was on the call earlier. She texted me during the middle of it. She's a Reiki person as well, like a Reiki healer. So there's just a lot of connections. So I think that was awesome. And I think everyone here appreciated your time. And I hope we can keep in touch and like stay connected with Seva and with you as well. So like, it was a blast. It's a lot of thank yous in the chat. But